Can you guys introduce mommy?
Spill the beans with Dr. Jill.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining on today's episode of Spill the Beans with Dr. Jill. As always, I'm going to have our guests introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Tara Bassett. I am a registered nurse and I work in home care. I'm currently in school to get my master's to become a family nurse practitioner. And I've been a nurse for about 15 years.
Very exciting. How long did you go to school for that?
Well, school took me a little bit longer. I did a 6-year stint to get my bachelor's degree, but young and trying to figure it out.
Yeah, no, I love that. But also, you've done trainings continuously to keep up,
Yes,
right?
yes,
And
yes.
you're in school, so
Mhm.
lifelong learner.
Yes, I actually recently, 2 years ago, I got certified as a nurse coach.
Mhm.
Um, so I can kind of coach people on lifestyle changes to help foster wellness.
Wonderful. So, in full transparency of all my videos, I talk to people about how we know each other.
Hmm.
So, a long time ago, how many years now?
Almost like 18.
18 years ago, my younger brother brought home Tara and later became my sister-in-law. So that's how we know
Yeah.
each other. But there's a lot of helping professions in our family. And I think when Tara joined, it wasn't, oh, there's a nurse here, but just someone that we utilize as a resource for everything and anything, right?
Mhm.
So when I started doing conversations around vicarious trauma, I think you kind of already knew a little bit.
Yes.
I mean, I would bring home my doctoral work and everyone
Mhm.
kind of knew what I was in, studying and researching, but you knew more than other family members because of the intersection of your work. So
Right.
is it fair to say vicarious trauma was not a new concept for you, a new term, just maybe enhanced it as we started sharing stories?
Well, you're probably the first person that brought the actual term vicarious trauma into light for me.
Mm,
Um, in the healthcare field, you hear other words like burnout or um, compassion fatigue is
yep.
another one that doesn't necessarily kind of define vicarious trauma because it's more secondary than
Mhm.
burnout is kind of like a result of
Right.
vicarious trauma. So in the medical field, at least in my experience, we've really never used that term or been trained on how to deal with it. They have a lot of support systems for like direct trauma, but not really vicarious trauma. So it's super interesting.
Yeah, and it's super scary because burnout is when the vicarious trauma has become toxic. And
Correct.
a lot of my research and others have identified that in the United States, we all, just being Americans walking every day, going to work, traveling, the news, the media, social media, all of that, we already get like 3 triggers of vicarious trauma just within our normal day.
Mhm.
Then, if you're a helping profession, within you walking into your patient caseload, you've already doubled that within the first couple of clients that you have, right?
Yeah.
But you're saying that when you went to school, there was no focus on how to prevent burnout by nurturing your vicarious trauma. There was no conversation about that.
Not vicarious trauma. They talk a lot about like self care,
Yeah.
stuff like that, but not those specific words.
It's so interesting. Do you have any advice on how we can teach young nurses, young practitioners that there's such a big difference between self-care and vicarious trauma?
Yeah. I think that, self care is obviously super important. And that kind of, if you're caring for yourself, I sometimes focus on like the pillars of health. So good sleep, exercise, fueling your body with the proper nutrients,
Mhm.
um, emotional intelligence, letting
Yeah.
things out and whatnot, kind of is like a precursor to being able to deal with
Mhm.
direct trauma and vicarious trauma. So my advice would be to take care of yourself so that your brain has the tools to deal with vicarious trauma when you're subjected to it.
Yeah, no, I love that. I always talk about how an analogy that I try to give to people is that self-care is really talking about how happy you are, your compassion and satisfaction, right? And that's to nurture this. But vicarious trauma is the byproduct of you being good at your job.
Hmm.
And so the fact that you had these patients and these narratives that you heard, you've and currently hear because you're still an active nurse, there are things that you're absorbing that are going to change the way that you live your life. Um, are there parts that you've changed, maybe how you parent or how you thought you would parent because of what you've seen in the medical place? Are there examples that you automatically think of something you would never give your kid or you would never do yourself because you've seen the negative side of it?
Yeah, I work with more of an elderly population, and I don't work in acute care where there's a lot of trauma, like an emergency room or something. So I do home care. I visit patients in their houses, mostly elderly, and family support is a big factor. So I think what I've learned most is probably like leaning on your family, having a good support system for your elders can really determine how well a person ages, to be honest. So I think that has kind of overflowed into my home life because
Mhm.
it's just so important to love your family members and support them and help them when they're in need. So I've seen some pretty unfortunate situations where, people really have no one, or they're, have been estranged from their family and they just have no support system. And it's really sad. It's bad for their mental health. It's bad for their physical health. Support is just so important.
Yeah, it's such a good lesson for us all to be reminded of elder care and how at some point a lot of our, you know, roles will kind of go into that, right? Like we
Mhm.
become the child becomes the parent
Full
and
circle.
life, right? Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things in higher ed that I've learned would be like a lot of safety precautions, right? And it's
Mhm.
because of the narratives that I'm hearing, I know to tell my kids dot 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 should they go to college, right? That's those learned stories are an example of a positive lens of vicarious trauma. Have you learned how to nurture your vicarious trauma to prevent negative vicarious trauma?
Yeah, I think I have very good coping mechanisms when it comes to absorbing and having empathy for others and compassion for others. I feel like I have a very good relationship with death,
Mm,
where um, it's just I understand that it's a part of life,
mhm,
and although it's difficult and the grieving process can be really really awful,
mhm,
I have been able to kind of like, I don't know, I guess compartmentalize
mhm,
when I experience other people's pain,
mhm.
not to really like bring it home or to dwell on it to be, in the moment with the patient, be their support system, give them all I have at that time, and then when I leave, to kind of shut that part off and not let it roll over into my personal life.
Is there a particular strategy that you've learned to shut it off? Is it something that you mentally are doing, a process, a counting system, music, sensory? Like, is there some strategy that you do where you say, okay, I'm actively trying to get it out and put it into the box that it belongs in?
I don't know that I have like a certain go-to
Hmm.
particular thing that I do. It's just over the years of being a nurse, I've just learned that, I can't change something once I'm gone.
Hmm.
So I just understand, I have just a good understanding that I've done my job while I'm there. I've done the best that I possibly can do. And
Hmm.
that when I leave, I just know that the if I dwell on something, the only person that is hurting is myself. So I think it's just I've trained my brain to
Hmm.
kind of, and of course, things like music, exercise has been a really big part of my life to kind of those endorphins, happy endorphins,
Yeah.
to make me like have a positive outlook on life. So I think,
And In the vicarious trauma world, we call what you're doing is a learned ritual, where you are actually saying to yourself, I accept that this is the end of my day.
Mhm.
And so that because I don't want to burn out, I am ending the conversation in my head so that I'm stronger the next day.
Mhm.
And that is a ritual and a muscle that you're developed because of your habit, right? Like because you are always working. In my field, I had a staff member once who thought I would be super impressed because they had taken on like 12 student conduct meetings in one day. And they came to me so happy and so proud and said, I just busted out 12 meetings. And I was like, there's only 8 hours in the workday plus the
Mhm.
hour lunch break. How did you serve 12 students successfully plus take care of yourself? And he kind of paused. Do you in the nursing field have a certain amount of caseload that you like to give yourself or best practices that you've learned to limit to prevent burnout?
Definitely. We have in home care, it's sort of like a productivity model where you have to see a certain amount of points or patients per day. Anything over and above that gets paid overtime. And I've always kind of been a hustler, growing up
Mhm.
with waitressing, bartending jobs while doing nursing, and just, always kind of put too much on my plate. But definitely in the last couple of years, I've learned that balance is really important.
Mhm.
So if I see too many patients in a day, number one, I'm not taking care of myself. Number two, I'm not giving my patients what they deserve.
Right,
And number three, I guess it just doesn't help anyone.
right.
So I've sort of limited myself to no more than really like 8 patients a day. So that's two
Mhm.
over what I'm supposed to see.
Mhm.
And I found that that's kind of like a good balance of me giving myself enough time, me giving the patients enough time for my visits, enough time to chart, and then still have time for my family when I get home. I cook dinner every night. So,
Yeah.
and I also train jujitsu. So I also have to make time for that. So, yeah,
Yeah, I love that
balance is key.
you're like secretly sneaking in some protective factors that you're doing that I talk about in other videos. So I appreciate
Yeah.
the context of like the holistic Terra experience. When you're charting, is there ever been a time in your history where, and I know that you mentioned you have a healthy relationship with death, dying, and bereavement, and that is, of course, a commitment that not a lot of our listeners have. And so we acknowledge that Tara has advanced knowledge in that, but even still, you are human. You're a mother, you're a daughter, all of it. And so when you're charting, if you were to become emotional or have a response that is not traditional, right? It's not like everyone that you meet, you cry because they passed away.
Right.
But if you are starting that moment, is there any ritual that you would stop charting and go do something? Is there something that you have learned that has helped if you start to get into that space of, I'm having a response right now?
I think that communication with your brother, my spouse,
Mm.
has been really key for helping me deal with things that happen at work. Obviously, not going into detail or names because of HIPAA, but I can sort of give him a situation, tell him what sucked about it,
Mhm, mhm.
and kind of just, I think getting it out
Yeah,
is the biggest and best way to deal with something. Also, charting in itself is almost like journaling,
yeah.
because I write a narrative note for every one of my patients. So I'm really telling the story of what happened during the visit, whether it be a positive or a negative thing. And that kind of helps me like wrap my brain around what went on,
Mhm,
whether I handled it well, if I
mhm,
did all the steps that I was supposed to do,
mhm,
and if I didn't, I can remedy that.
mhm.
And if I did, then I know that gives me kind of like peace of mind that I dealt with the situation the best that I could, and that kind of puts my mind at ease.
Yeah, one of the other speakers that I spoke with that's in the medical profession said that it's bittersweet, the AI technology, because she can use transcription notes. And so it lets her to be like kind of vent it out like a therapist, but then
Mhm.
she has to read the AI notes to make sure that there's no issues. And it's almost like a double whammy. And so she was against AI transcription notes. But so I'm interested in the medical profession if that's going to serve as another protective factor if we find ways to be less in the weeds with the content that we have to write, or if it's actually not serving us very well. And I think time will kind of tell what the research says about that. Um,
Mhm.
is there another strategy that if you had to do all over again, you would tell younger professionals to start doing what?
I guess maybe just like balance. I know I've said that before, but I think life, not just with work or vicarious trauma or anything, everything is about balance, whether it be your diet or the amount of exercise that you do or the amount of work that you put on your plate. I think that there has to be a good balance, and you have to really take an internal look at what your values are, and then align your life with it.
Mhm.
So like don't make compromises when it comes to like taking a job because it pays a lot of money, but it doesn't align with your ethics or your beliefs. You have to draw hard lines in life to like honor yourself, your beliefs, and your values.
I think that that's powerful. I always end my podcast with, what would you spill the beans? And it sounds like you're saying balance is the key,
Yeah.
right? To be holistic and take care of yourself.
Mhm.
Um, the other thing that I was curious about before we end is just, did you ever think that when you first got into the profession that you would face a national pandemic, that there would be so much changes in the healthcare profession? Did you ever forecast that happening? And if so, what do you think is the future of the medical profession for us to be aware of?
Honestly, that pandemic sort of came out of left field and was heavy and fast. And it was like, oh my God, like things are happening so fast. And what do we do? And, obviously in the medical fields, it didn't really halt our work. So a lot of other professions, they were kind of put on hold or they were able to work from home. But in the nursing fields, you don't get that option. You're bedside, clinical, seeing, touching patients. So I think that probably the medical field may have been the most traumatized from the pandemic. And looking at the future, I mean, I guess, learn from our mistakes, the mistakes that we made from the pandemic. I think our government can learn a lot. Um, and I think just, not make the same mistakes. That's the definition of insanity, is doing the same thing with expectation of a different result. So
Right.
just learning from what we saw. And research will help with that.
Right. Yeah. And trusting the science behind it all, I think is really important. And I'm
Mhm.
glad that you were able to say, because I don't want to come off biased of where the worst helping profession is and who got it the hardest during COVID. But I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted season two to be dedicated to the helping profession of the medical industry, because the individuals that I assumed knew everything about vicarious trauma, I am quickly learning they experience it, but they're not talking about it. They weren't taught about how to handle it. And it's just given that this is what you signed up for and you're really good at your job. So plug through.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I really think that it's amazing that you're bringing this topic to the, you know, forefront with all that you're doing, because it's not something that's well known, but it can be extremely helpful for every profession.
Well, it's so good to talk to you about all of this. I end with asking if there's individuals that want to get connected with you for any of the education that you can offer. Is there a website? Is there a way that people can get a hold of you?
I guess through my email. I don't know if you want to put it in the notes. But I don't have a website. I haven't really started anything with the nurse coaching thing quite yet.
Mhm.
I kind of moved right into the master's to become a nurse practitioner, but eventually down the line, I do want to work in like metabolic health. So when that time comes, I'll, share my information so I can help people get healthier.
Awesome. All right, Tara. Well, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of Spill the Beans, where you heard it from here, a medical professional who encouraged us to keep in mind that balance is just not one note, but holistic. Thank you all. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for watching today's episode of Spill the Beans with Dr. Jill and my sister-in-law, who happens to be a nurse. There are a couple of things that she did not highlight, and I think it's very typical of someone in the helping profession to be so humble. So I want to highlight them because they are strategies that will help you to navigate your vicarious trauma. First and foremost, since the time that I've known Tara, she's been someone that has loved to work out in a professional capacity or even for leisure, meaning that she's done marathons, but then she's also just an active person that loves to hike. And I think that the combination of going around nature and being outside is really helpful to really reset. And so I want to highlight that that is something that she does. The other thing is she loves to laugh. We watch silly TV shows to be able to turn off her brain. I think is also a really helpful strategy. The other thing that I would say about Tara and some of the strategies that she's learned is that because she's been in other sectors of the nursing profession, she has a community that can rally around her and that she never does the work in silo. And so communicating with others in the profession, staying relevant, going to conferences, webinars, all of that is really helpful strategies. So if anything that we learned from COVID, we know that we have to prepare for the unknown. And I think that the medical professional has taught us that we have to take care of ourselves while we're taking care of others. And hopefully, in today's episode, it's giving you some different language, different motivations, different perspective to normalize that we are human and that we need balance. So, with that, I sign off and wish you well. Bye bye.